Okay, so let's get started because we're a little bit behind time already, and we have a lot of questions to answer in this panel. First of all, thank you so much to the organizers. This is such a wonderful event, and it's so wonderful to be here in Edinburgh. And to the speakers this morning, such a nice backdrop. And some of the themes that were raised this morning do permeate through to what we're discussing now on open access. So we are going to talk about OA models, but in a slightly different way. So when we came together as a group, we saw that we do cover most of the models in the industry right now between us. On the slide is Tasha's categorization. We cover all of these between us, but instead of focusing on individual business models and selling our products to you, we thought actually we're going to speak here as people to other people about the bigger issues around open access, the opportunities, and how we can work together. So without further ado, we can start the panel. If we could go back to the slide with the names, then we can start with introductions. So my name's Emily Poznanski. I'm the chair. I'm the CEO of Sciendo, which is part of the Gruyter Brill group. I'll over to you, Richard.
Hello, I'm Richard Gallagher. I'm the president and editor-in-chief of Annual Reviews.
Hi, I'm Ben Ashcroft. I'm the CCO at Gruyter Brill.
Hi, I'm Dhara Snowden. I'm the Open Access Textbook Manager at ECL Press.
And I'm Denne. I'm the Director of Publishing for the editorial books team at Cambridge University Press, academic division.
Okay, and the structure of this panel is also going to be different, where we're just going to do one panelist asks a question to another panelist, and we're going to do a quick fire round, hopefully to encourage more quick questions from you all. So we won't have full, complete answers. We're just going to go quite quickly, touching upon some of the bigger, what we think are some of the bigger topics around OA today. So to kick off with a light question, what is the main catalyst for change when it comes to open access today?
Well, I think the first thing to be said is how diverse the academic publishing industry is. Thoroughly international, catering to global audiences. Publishing entities differ in many dimensions, including their size, their history, their areas of focus, and even their organizational objectives. The cultures of the communities that we serve is still more diverse than that. And the other stakeholders in academic publishing, such as governments, academic libraries, funding bodies, and individual authors and readers, span the whole diversity of attitudes to open access, from being very enthusiastic to seeing it as something approaching abhorrent. I imagine that most of us in this room, certainly in this panel, are pro-open access, maybe ultra-pro-open access. But that's not necessarily true of everyone here. Nevertheless, I think we can all acknowledge that there is a transition going on to open access. It has been complex and unpredictable, sometimes even chaotic, and I really liked the poem that was quoted by Amina Shah earlier from Edwin Morgan. Push the boat out, whatever the seas, unknown is best, it beckons best. And I think that's been how open access has moved forward. So with all this diversity, it's hard to pinpoint the primary catalyst for open access. I suggest that it might be Coalition S and their Plan S, the Plan S model as one of the major catalysts from 2018. Came about when a group of public and private funders became, I think, a bit frustrated by the lack of progress, and their, let's call it cajoling, prompted action even amongst the most hesitant of publishers. It was definitely an inflection point. However, in my view, the course set by Plan S leaves something to be desired. The preeminent models that emerged with the implicit support of Plan S are APCs and Read and Publish, and I think that these are quite discriminatory. Funders cover open access fees for the researchers whose work they support, neglecting other equally important work from other people in the field. And Read and Publish deals take place where wealthy institutions can afford to make their research open access, but leave behind smaller and poorer institutions. The generation of academic knowledge is a collaborative endeavor. It's not only the big centers or the big funders that can finance it. We need to bring everybody on board. And I think that publishing as well needs to be collaborative and inclusive, and I think we need to find a way to do that. I'm also worried that the funding agencies, having started by supporting open access, are now withdrawing that support, creating a little bit more chaos. They don't seem to be accountable for their actions. And I think it's time for all of the stakeholders to get together and work out in a transparent fashion a practical collaboration to sustainable open access for the entire academic publishing community. So I'm going to turn to you, Ben, as someone leading in open access transformation. How do publishers remain relevant through open access? What is it that we do that's uniquely valuable to academia, and how should we make that apparent to everyone?
Yeah, thanks for the easy questions. I think it's becoming increasingly apparent that that's being challenged. I mean, it's being challenged by policymakers. It's being challenged by funders, as you've noted. It's being challenged by academics themselves, and it's becoming harder, I think, due to a range of factors to counter that. You know, open access is one of those drivers potentially. You know, in a world when tech makes it increasingly easy to format content into a publishable form, when there are networks, social media or other networks that make it possible for everybody to become a publisher and to get their content out there, that means that it's probably right that the value driven by publishers is increasingly being questioned. And I think as an industry, we probably have to accept that we've done a poor job sometimes at putting forward a compelling and a clear value case for what we do. That case hasn't been helped by the probably justified charges of profiteering by some of the major corporate players, of course, or, for example, by the fact that in the name of cost savings, we're increasingly asking authors themselves to take on part of the process that might previously have been done by publishers. There are big variations between books and journals publishing here, I think, but I think there are some key points that remain important despite everything else. One of them is our role as in curating, in selecting, and in quality assurance. I think that's incredibly important still and becoming more so. We're fighting against massive societal changes. The sort of drive towards good enough, you know, what you can grab off the internet quickly is often held to be good enough for whatever purposes. And I think in this context as well, you have to consider whether things like volume-driven APC models are a good thing with their reduced focus on peer review. Another aspect would simply be organizing. You know, it's easy to corral facts out of AI applications, as Christy showed with her presentation. If you get the prompts right, you can get some pretty good stuff. But understanding things in context, getting an overview of a topic is actually much harder. And publishers, I think, are uniquely well placed to present research in that context. STM is a good example of that. STM, you know, is obviously more heavily data-based, fact-based, but humanities and social sciences aspects to a subject are really key to understanding why the science is important. What is the science good for? So that role of presenting a topic such as climate change, for example, in its entire context, covering the science but also the social science and the humanities aspects of it, is an example of where publishers have a real contribution to make. I think brand cachet still counts for a lot. If you're an author in the US, having your title published by by a university press is often really key to achieving tenure, for example. And the decisive factor there is the renommee, is the reputation of the publishing house as a guarantor of quality. And finally, and I make no apologies for coming from overwhelmingly a humanities and social sciences book-based publisher, the relationship with editorial staff is often, one thing that we're told a lot is that relationship is often more key to an author's decision about where to publish and how to publish than the name of the publishing house or the imprint or other factors. And that relationship, that collaboration in bringing content together, shaping it, is still incredibly key. You can add to that the whole process of production and typesetting, which is also still very, very important, especially in humanities and social sciences, where the book as an object is still important despite digitization. And I think finally we shouldn't overlook the fact that it takes organization and project management to realize these large-scale projects that many of our publishers are working on. I'm both the son of an academic and also a cat owner, and I think I can probably well qualified to say that working with academics is like herding cats. And there's a skill set involved there, there's experience involved there in bringing these projects together that shouldn't be neglected. Okay, moving over to you, Dhara. So you've worked in both traditional book publishing and now at UCL with open access books. And if we think about the differences between traditional book models and open access books, as you publish them now, how is the process of evaluating what to publish change? And do you consider different factors in your discussions at UCL as you talk about what to publish and how how has the importance of these various factors changed?
Great question. Thank you for asking that. And I would say there are some similarities and a lot of differences in how we evaluate projects at an institutional open access publisher versus my experience at commercial academic publishers, especially with textbooks. The primary factor when commissioning and signing up new textbooks at a commercial academic press was around market size and expected sales, and evaluating that kind of cost profit, cost benefit matrix, so making sure that we're prioritizing areas that we would expect to see kind of higher profits or a bigger market share. With open access, that factor isn't part of our decision making. We're not looking at kind of that traditional kind of financial model, and so that is replaced by other things, in terms of evaluating the value of each project or potential project. We have a set budget, and there's only so much we can do with that, and so we do have to think about what value is being added by these projects that we choose to publish as open access texts. A lot of that is about providing student support. Are these texts filling a gap where there currently isn't enough teaching and learning resource that would benefit potential students? Are we looking at textbooks that are helping to facilitate more hybrid teaching and learning versus kind of the traditional text-based or print-based textbooks that are out there? We've learnt a lot during COVID times in terms of teaching and learning, and a lot of academics are integrating different ways of communicating with their students, both with audio, visual material, not just kind of following a traditional textbook. And can we provide textbooks that fit that kind of teaching? It's also about kind of looking at those courses that use textbooks the most, and can we provide an open access version of those to help students, help more students be able to reach that kind of material, but also in kind of niche areas where perhaps commercial publishers have decided that they're not going to invest money in publishing textbooks for those smaller or more advanced level courses, but our student population and our academics at our institution are really struggling to find appropriate teaching and learning resources. That would be a valuable exercise for us to create a textbook around some of those areas where perhaps the student size is much smaller, but the kind of textbook we're creating brings value. So yeah, really thinking about it in a slightly different way, but making sure that we're evaluating each project based on potential value that isn't in financial terms.
Thank you. A follow-up question on that, maybe taking the author perspective. Yeah. I mean, in your view, what motivates authors to publish now in open access, and how's that shifted compared with decisions they make in a paid access world? And what do authors think publishers do in an open access world anyway?
Well, it's really interesting that you asked that, because I'm starting this list from scratch. A lot of what I'm doing is talking to academics and finding out what it is that they want to see. You know, what kind of textbooks would they like? You know, what opportunities could be available to them if their text was open access. And in our proposal form, that in the same way that I think a lot of other presses have, we have a box where they can provide feedback on why they've chosen to submit their proposal to us. And in that, more often than not, we're seeing the feedback is that they think that making their text open access will help increase the global readership. So that's what they're seeing in a lot of the OA metrics for research monographs, for textbooks, etc. And that is something they really value. The idea that without that kind of financial barrier to access for the reader, it can, you know, their work can be used and accessed in lots of different ways across the globe. And that seems to be a very important kind of decision-making tool for them to think about having an open access textbook, or to publish with a smaller press that is fully OA versus a more established commercial press that they might have published other texts with. So it's interesting to see that is becoming kind of more of an important factor, that you know, impact, I suppose, in that way is really important for an author that spent a really long time, many years crafting either their research monograph or their textbook, that they really want to produce it and publish it in a way that people can access it more widely.
Great, thank you.
Okay. And over to Ben. I think this feeds quite nicely from what we've been talking about. But open access undoubtedly comes with both benefits and challenges to publishers. In your view, what are the unintended consequences or unforeseen challenges of the open access business models we're working with?
Well, thanks, Dhara. And just for full disclosure, I'm speaking as a dog owner here, not a cat owner. So that's, I think with Christy, that creates a community interest group of 2 so far already at this conference. I'm sure anybody else is welcome to join us later and discuss their dogs. I think that the benefits of open access are pretty well understood, and I think probably speaking to a room of people here that would agree. I come back to something I think I heard when this all sort of started, which is we know it's a really good idea, but we've got to work out how it's going to work. And you know, those benefits of access to all, equity of access, increased usage and citation, you know, are laudable, and we shouldn't forget that that's the spirit in which this was all started. I think where all of the challenges come are around the implementation of those good intentions, and around ensuring that the models that we put into place, all the mechanisms that are put into place, don't unintentionally undermine those benefits. And I think that's important to remember as well. People do want this to work. You know, there's not much evil intent in this space, but it's complicated. I think something I'd say about the pilot models, and indeed open access funding models generally, is that for all of their flavours, they're mostly of a couple of different kinds. So the ones that publishers start often rely on libraries. Those libraries either need to buy or subscribe to a collection to fund future books. That might be subscribing to a backlist collection. It might be subscribing to a frontlist. Or they need to pledge against individual titles in one form or another. We've got a pilot program that does that now. And some, like ours, rely on that buy-in to make books open access. And you might throw in an element of outside funding as well. So you might have a big external funder who's doing some of that. But that library buy-in is a really important part of it. And I think coming back to my point about not unintentionally undermining the benefits, I think that fundamental point makes assumptions already which aren't equitable or universally true. For example, that all presses have equal access to library funds, or that presses have a certain scale to them that enables them to have those kind of conversations. It presupposes that there are really good and objective criteria for selecting the right books to put into those open access schemes, and also that there are good and objective criteria for measuring the impact of those books, and for measuring, and also assuming that that libraries have adequate budgets and mechanisms to facilitate open access themselves. So I think that whole area is where things get quite tangled. What I would say, another thing that I would say is quite, I think about a lot with this question, is that there are lots of open access mandates, and our job today wasn't to sit on this panel and discuss the ref, but that's probably the latest example of a mandate that we in the industry have been issued, again for laudable reasons. But one of the worries I have about some of the mandates that are coming out is that they put the response to those mandates squarely in the publisher's sphere, or the publisher's gift to solve. And I worry that with all good intentions from us, by our own proactive responses to those, again for the right reasons, we're signaling that what's going on at the moment is fair and achievable. We're really making it really becomes, open access becomes our problem. There's an edict, and then we're the ones that have to step up and solve that. And I think, in my view, there needs to be some change to the conversation, and talking a little bit earlier about communities and collective action. I think that's something that we should be putting more pressure onto, which is that we agree with those mandates, but there needs to be a corresponding and appropriate acknowledgement of the cost and mechanisms of funding that publishing. And I worry sometimes that by stepping up to that challenge, we're signaling that it's okay, that we're just told these things have to happen, and then we go away and make them happen. So I am going to jump on now to a question for you, Emily, and that is asking you what opportunities you think for publishers that open access has opened up, both for you and for the industry. And we can't really go through a session in 2024 without talking about AI, so that includes artificial intelligence.
We were joking before this panel started that we're going to pass the baton on as quickly as you can because everyone has stage fright. So I'm going to do the same now. But talking about the opportunities, you talked a lot about the benefits of open access, and again, the question's slightly different. The opportunities around OA, we shouldn't underestimate what the democratization of knowledge enables. And we have individual stories from authors, or if we help a society transition to OA to help better achieve their goals, those are powerful stories and remind us why we're here to do what we're doing. So I think that would probably be the main opportunity for us. There's obviously lots of opportunities around data and usage that I think we're starting to tap into, but I don't think we have given it the time or investment that's needed to really benefit from that. Other opportunities, I think, around new entrants into the market, so whether that's fully OA publishers, whether that's new journals, whether that's emerging scholars, open access does level the playing field. And again, huge opportunities there. That also come with their caveats. And I think that's what we've been discussing a little as a panel, and I think is coming through in the talks this morning, that when we sort of step out of the industry and look, for example, what's happening on social media, where everyone can say whatever they like, that it's unfettered access, anyone can be a writer, an author. There are some problems around that. And with AI, I think the new opportunity arises for us, where we really can double down on our value proposition, not as the gatekeeper of knowledge, because that's a horrible term, but as the curator, as vetting that content. And nowadays, having a work sort of published, approved, and certified by a veritable publisher has much greater value than it did have, I would argue, a few years ago. So I think that's, again, a theme that seems to be running through this morning, and one that would be great to discuss further during the conference with you all. On to more about models. Quite often we deal with books models separately from journals models. We decided not to do that, but just to make a bit of a comparison, what would you say book publishers could learn from journal publishers and vice versa?
Thanks. I've never been a book publisher, and I guess I look at it with rose-tinted glasses, so what I say might be a bit naive and a bit romantic, maybe. I think that the relationship dynamics between publishers and authors in the book side of things is characterized by greater closeness, longevity of interactions, and a higher level of collaboration. And this environment, I think, should provide valuable insights and lessons for the publishers to improve their business. Comparatively, book publishing feels a bit like a specialist food shop on the traditional high street, as opposed to the more impersonal atmosphere of a supermarket or a hypermarket, if you're one of the big publishers that's found in journal publishing. And we need both probably, but we could probably learn something from the local. Also, the rapport between librarians and book publishers from the outside appears to be more amicable in comparison to the sometimes tense interactions that journal publishers have with librarians. That may not be true, but it looks like that from the outside. While there's likely considerable variation in both book and journal publishing, I wonder if publishers, book publishers, prioritize factors beyond purely financial considerations more highly than journal publishers do. On the journal side, I think we have an emphasis on growth, launching new titles, increasing the number of articles that we publish, implementing significant price hikes. And possibly book publishers aren't quite as fixated on constant expansion. And looks like to me that they place a greater emphasis on high quality, on sustainability, and maybe a more measured approach to growth. This is works well in the times that we're in at the moment. We need a similar approach at the political level and the business level and societal level to address issues like the climate crisis. We need to look for sustainability rather than growth, I think. And maybe if this is the approach of book publishers, it can be something that we can all learn and embrace. Another valuable lesson that we can learn from book publishers, I think, is their adeptness at making their content more accessible, catering to broader audiences and framing complex ideas around more human scale of content. Also more developmental editing so that the reading becomes easier and more rewarding. Isn't something that journal publishers do, but maybe we could do if we were focused more on quality and less on quantity. Something that both groups must take into account, and people here love words, but there's a loss of primacy, I think, of the written word, and there's increasing influence of the spoken word and of pictures, both videos and still pictures. And I think it's time for us to embrace that, not replace the written word, but to include spoken word more and video more, and AI will help with that. So maybe we'll all be transforming into media companies than just publishers. I want to say one last thing about opportunities. I think that publishing all our stuff open access doesn't just help with inclusivity for the global academic community. It opens doors for us to interact with audiences beyond academia. And I think that the knowledge generated by academia isn't widely enough used by other areas in society, the business sector, law, policy, education, and so on. And we have a real opportunity here that starts with us making our content open. But then, on top of that, if we consider the publication of the papers to be the first step rather than the end step in the process, we can start to build, using AI tools, I hope, ways to interact with other communities, making our knowledge, or the knowledge that we publish, more relevant to other parts of society. So I think there's an optimistic component to this. Ben, I want to ask you now a specific question about one particular model that we both care about, and that is Subscribe to Open, which has versions both in journal publishing and in book publishing. How would you compare the Subscribe to Open approaches in each of those fields? And what do you feel are the benefits, and what are the inherent risks of these kind of models? Where does it work, and where are the weaknesses?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. And there clearly are similarities between collaborative books, open access models, and S2O. And I guess we're back at the community building aspect here again, aren't we? It's a crowdfunding approach. It relies on people coming together and acting together to achieve a certain aim, and that's true of both books and journals models. I guess you could also say that there's an element of acting into the common good involved in both, but to be honest, I would challenge that S2O relies on common good. I actually see it much more as being about enlightened self-interest, because fundamentally it provides a simpler and a more cost-effective way for institutions to provide open access publishing opportunities to their faculty than many APC-based models or other models do. There are differences as well. Subscribe to Open is or certainly should be entirely self-funding, whereas many of the collaborative books ventures out there have required financial support from third parties to get off the ground. S2O also relies on money that's already in the system. It relies on reallocating what institutions now spend on subscriptions, which is already allocated to journals. And I'd be interested to hear from librarians or from others in the audience about this, but it's certainly my impression that collaborative books models still depend to quite a large extent on special funding being found or on funding being redirected from other places within budgets to work, and that has obvious implications for other priorities, other acquisitions priorities. And as far as the point about the benefits and issues around S2O is concerned, I mean, S2O as a model can really only benefit from scale and from being adopted by more publishers. The more publishers that are out there educating the market, advocating and talking about how it works, the better. There's already a very strong publisher community around S2O, which works extremely well. But I think communicating the benefits and making sure they're really well understood should lead to wider acceptance. A colleague of mine is fond of saying that it's a very simple model that's actually very, very difficult to explain, and that is true. It is a challenge to put it across well. Now, the Gruyter, it's well known we're a fairly early adopter of S2O, and certainly one of the first publishers to say that we're going to adopt it at large scale. But even we have never put forward S2O as the only way to journal transformation. I mean, we will continue to pursue a mixed economy that includes APC models, that includes diamond models, sponsored models, for example. It just works for us for large parts of our portfolio, and that's partly because we have 2/3 of our portfolio in humanities and social sciences subjects, where there are well-known funding and well-known cultural challenges to transforming those journals into open access, which have to be overcome. It also solves an issue for us, which is frankly that our authors are not where we do our subscription business. So for us, transformational agreements, APC-driven models really don't have the impact that we want to see in transforming the portfolio. But one thing that was increasingly important to us as we went through this sort of strategy process to fix on S2O as a main model was it's also very equitable. It provides opportunities to authors, for example, in the Global South, that they simply wouldn't have if publishing was dependent on paying. On the other side, the perceived weaknesses of the model are well known. The key one is the vulnerability to the free rider issue, so institutions cancelling subscriptions and the assumption that enough others will maintain them so that the content remains open access at no cost. I think the key to countering this is the enlightened self-interest point that I made earlier. It's not based on a charitable concept of benefiting the greater good, but on that enlightened self-interest. It's significantly cheaper as an institution, in most cases, to continue to pay an S2O fee, effectively the subscription, than to pay often even a single APC to allow an author from that institution to publish open access. And the other issue that's often raised is whether S2O has a long-term future, and the honest answer to that is we don't know. But given Plan S is called time on transformational agreements and all the other things that are happening in the open access world at the moment, you could raise the question about any open access model. Put the question out there, does anyone know or is anyone prepared to put a view forward about where open access is going to be in 5 years? Please don't ask me that question.
That was going to be the closing question.
That was going to be the closing question. Spoiler alert, sorry. All I know is that S2O seems to offer the best opportunity for us at the moment, and for immediate, large-scale, sustainable transformation. And that's really, I think, as far as we can go right now. Over to you again, Dhara. So the move to digital and open access models has contributed, many would say, to the atomization of research. So we now think about how to support research articles, data. But when you speak to an author, so for an example, an author that's been slaving away on a monograph for 10 years, probably they shudder at the thought of being called a content provider, right? How's the publisher value changing in the context of this transformation, this digital transformation, and how's the relationship between the publisher and the author changing, and how are technology influencing that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I think it picks up on a lot of themes that both yourself and Richard have started talking about as well, and Emily. The purpose of us as academic publishers is to help curate this material, whether it be research material or teaching and learning material, and to sort of stop thinking in that way of individual pieces of content, but much more around kind of a conversation between research material and teaching and learning material, and where it has relevance to policy making or the real world or practitioners or professionals, and our role as connectors to all of those spaces. So our authors are writing this material, and it's really our role to help curate that and connect that to different audiences with open access, that and removing that financial barrier to access. That can happen a little bit more in a streamlined way, and discoverability, etc. What we're finding with a lot of our OA content is people in places around the world and citations are coming from places that we wouldn't expect. You know, it's not necessarily who we would have traditionally marketed some of this material to and said, you know, you should read this, we think it will be relevant to you. It's actually being used by people we couldn't even imagine that would find it useful in that way. I think with open access material as well, under the Creative Commons licenses, there's a really interesting dynamic in terms of not needing to, for book formats, not needing to have or use the book verbatim as it stands. There is an element of picking and choosing elements that are most relevant to either your teaching or your research, and building, you know, modifying it, remixing it, adding some of your own material to it, and then using it to teach your course. So that kind of that decision making about having to use a textbook as it is removed. You know, you as the reader or the user of the material are also part of how that is kind of put together and which bits you're picking from. And that's become really, really important post-pandemic as well, where you know, there's a lot of material to sift through, and it's not always reasonable to expect your students to fully read every book on their reading list. So what can you pick and choose, and how can you kind of build that out? With digital technologies, I think, again, we've been talking a lot about the personal relationships with authors, and how that tends to be a lot factor in a lot into their decision making about who they choose to publish their work with. You know, work that they've spent years and you know, blood, sweat, and tears to create. It's not an easy decision for them often, but the personal relationships tend to play a huge part in that. And with digital technology and AI, you know, it's striking that balance between maintaining that kind of strong person-to-person relationship with authors, but also, where you can, using digital technologies for efficiency tools, or you know, ways in which that it can perhaps provide a bit more support to authors before the production process as well as during the production process. You know, are there things we can suggest to our authors, you know, if they're really struggling to write that final chapter? So I've worked with loads of authors that have taken 10 years to write their book, and it's that last chapter that they just can't finish, you know, and whether we can suggest, you know, whether there are things that we might be able to suggest, digital technologies that might be able to help push them, you know, past that finish line. Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting time at the moment with that. And it leads on really nicely to what I'm going to ask you, Ben, about how do we measure value, publisher value in a digital environment? Yeah, love to hear.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it does lead on the point you were making about, you know, our books being used in a multitude of different ways is a really interesting one. And I think as an industry, we are in a messy and consensus-resistant industry, and that's one of the things that a lot of us find really attractive about working in publishing. But then the question about how that extends to how our content is used as well, that question about how we measure our value and impact is a really important one. And honestly, I think at the moment, quite inadequately, but I think we're getting better. I think we've got to the stage now where we've got some numbers. But if we're honest about that, we're still struggling to put the right context around them. You know, 200 this, 500 that, 10,000 here, you know, different ways of measuring hits and content. They are more or less meaningless without context. And I think one of the things I hope, for example, you know, with I'll throw AI in here again, you know, is that in the future, you know, citation, which is probably the best metric that we've got, but that's quite messy for books, you know, that you might be able to have tools that put context around citation, where your content's being cited, what it's being used for, those kind of things I think would be really, really interesting. In terms of open access, we know that open access books get used more. Having been disparaging about those numbers, they do show us that the books get used more, but then again, that's probably self-evident because more people can access those books. So just the fact that they're getting more hits says little about their value, really, in itself. And as I said, citations are a better metric, but measuring citations in a book world is really fragmented and noisy. I mean, it's the same in journals, it's even more so in books. You know, that usage metric's still a key metric for books. You know, libraries use it, we use it to explain our value. But it's really clumsy because it doesn't tell you about the value of each individual hit. You know, what was that content used for and what did it yield? I think there are other metrics like, you know, alt metric and, you know, which are trying to put more context around this. And that's, again, you know, that's really great. But the minute you start getting into that world, those things can be very complicated. They can be complicated to understand for ourselves, and they can be really hard to explain to our authors. You know, the lovely thing about a print book, the artifacts that you give to an author is that they can see it and smell it and feel it, and it's a really tangible thing. And we're still, as publishers, you know, I'm a great believer in digital value, but we're still struggling to explain that well, and also to tell people what conclusions they could draw. I think, I'm just going to, one more point, because I'm aware of the time, but I think a really important thing here is this is about relevance to me, and I think that the future of those kind of measures is going to be finding good ways to measure relevance. And I'm going to give one example from our Flip It Open model, and just a quick, I won't go into the details about that, but basically it's a retrospective model where books can flip up to 18 months after publication. They rely on libraries buying them to knowing that they're going to flip, and then they flip. And when we started doing that, we got really excited about the idea of seeing a spike post-flip. But what we saw was that the spike in usage, that is, still happens at publication, the main spike. You know, and that's true, as we all know, in publishing. You know, when you first bring something out, it piques a lot of interest, and there's marketing activity, etc. We don't know yet what the long-term numbers will look like around that. I imagine that usage will be higher on those books, but we didn't see a big spike at that point. What we did see, though, which was really interesting, is that post-flip, those books are accessed by 3 times as many countries as they were pre-flip. Notably, countries where libraries and institutions might not otherwise afford access. It's a really meaningful statistic, I think, and even more so, you know, when you bring in that kind of global relevance. And the example that I will give is we published a book about the Haitian Revolution, Rituals, Runaways, and the Haitian Revolution. You should all read it, it's fantastic. Please buy a copy, even though it's open access. But the point that was the first one we measured this statistic with. It was used by 3 times as many countries, and notably it was first accessed in the Caribbean post-flip. Now, it's a bit glib to draw a really concrete conclusion there, but I would say that tells you a lot. If that's a book about a region that's never been accessed in that region. And I think we need to find more ways and better ways to tell those kind of stories to our authors and communities.
That's great. So I think we'll open it up to the floor, because I have more questions, but I'm going to ask you all. I think we have one back here. It'll save us predicting what happens in 5 years' time.
Ben, my colleague, is trying to derail me. Hi, panel. Thank you very much for that. I'm Chris Bennett. I'm at Cambridge University Press. You made a series of really good interconnected comments there, and I wanted to connect them and ask a question. Those comments included the importance of working with what academics really want, the difficulties of doing that, the strains that places on traditional publishing venues, the importance of transformation not just being a publisher problem, equally the importance of sustainability versus volume. We're in a world where, ironically, open access is driving volumes up, and the drivers to publication for many academics are driving those volumes up. Integrity is falling. Budgets are not changing at best, and we're hurtling towards another sustainability crisis in publishing. If we keep talking about models at the transactional level, are we just continuing to solve the wrong problem, whereas actually we need to be looking at academic behaviour? Are there models that the industry can offer that will help to change those behaviours, or can we in other ways step up as part of that dialogue? Thank you.
That's a great summary and a great question, and one that did come up in our discussions. I don't know, who would like to start with, who would like to take it? Richard?
Yeah, there's a lot of unintended consequences because there's so many competing points of view, and we haven't come to consensus really around how to do open in a sustainable way. I think that there needs to be an effort to get all of the relevant parties at the table to agree on common goals, and there isn't that at the moment. A lot of the problems with volume is really the way that open access is structured has led to opportunities, and when there's opportunities, those opportunities are going to be taken. That's really pushed the volume up. The biggest problem really is that the researchers, or in my case, the STM researchers, are not as engaged in the process as they should be, because they're the ones that have got the power to decide on how we all follow, I think. And so we need to get them much more heavily engaged in the value. To do that, I think we need to show value to them, because whether something's behind a paywall or not, most of the people that I deal with can access it anyway. So we need to be using open access to make their content more relevant to society, I think. I think that would be a big step.
Yeah, and it was intentional that we weren't speaking about specific business models here. So not talking about APCs, BPCs, we're drawing some comparisons between models, but it was intentional because I think the consensus here was we're at the point of maturity with open access where we need to stop and look and reflect at, what are the implications in more broadly for academia, and sort of bringing back that responsibility, because that's our sort of chance to empower ourselves a little bit more as publishers, rather than diminishing in value. We'll sort of, if we step up now, and make a claim, then I think we have a chance to survive in the long run. So, should we take another question if there are more? There was someone at the front, I think. Yeah.
Hello. Hi, I'm Juho Aalto from Finnish Legal Policy Association in Finland, and I'm also working as a scholar. So I was thinking that, are you familiar with different kinds of classification systems that are, for instance, in use in Finland and Norway, where publishing houses are rated, and those ratings then have an impact on the compensation that the faculties get for per capita publication money from the ministries, because this is how the Nordic universities are funded, and because there are no tuition fees. So are you familiar of this, that you are being classified also in terms of open application, open access, and the level of what the publishing house is seen for securing academic quality in publications to tackle this problem of searches in amounts of articles published and so on. Thanks. I don't know if I made any sense, but
no, it absolutely makes sense, and I don't think I had thought about those categorizations helping with managing that surge. Actually, I hadn't made the connection, so thank you for that. Does anyone want to take that question or comment on those rankings? I think publishers are very familiar with them because we run up against them very often. It's, Ben, do you want to?
Well, the only point I was going to make more generally about this is that I think what it speaks to as well is that this whole landscape has become quite complex and fragmented, and I don't think as publishers we're necessarily that good at parsing and sharing that information and interpreting what that means for us in terms of how we respond to some of those things. And something I've been thinking about for a long time and talking about for a long time and not doing enough on is that question around how we become better consultants to our authors about open access. If in the books world, if people are looking to publish, we should be able to, we should understand those mechanisms better. We should understand where the university funds are. They don't always sit in the same places. And that again feels to me frustratingly like one of those things that publishers compete on too much. You know, we hoard this kind of information where in actual fact it's not in the interest of the industry to do so. So that's the more general point I would make, I think.
We've got a couple more questions.
Thank you very much. Anthony Conn, Liverpool University Press. I've got a quick comment and a quick question. The quick comment is just to say a thank you to Richard, who really for your bravery in pioneering Subscribe to Open and any reviews. I think all of us who use that model owe you a debt. So thank you. And to the panel, particularly struck by some of the things that Ben Denne's been saying about open access almost being framed as a kind of it's a publisher problem to fix now. We all talk about it. The libraries all talk about it. The academics talk about it to some extent, but really just have enough pressures already. The stakeholders who are largely absent from this are the senior leadership of universities, and they're the people who can generate real change. I mean, I've had conversations in the last few weeks with a library around committing more funds to open access books, and the response was, well, we need to fix the toilets, we're not going to get any more money. And what can we do to engage with Pro-Vice Chancellors for Research and senior leadership? How can we influence the people who can fundamentally change things? I'm really conscious of the way in which, for instance, institutional rights retention policies have been cascaded very effectively by universities and implemented through various forms of technology. Is there anything that we can do to sway senior leadership to get on board with the sorts of things that we're doing, rather than talking to everybody else but not really engaging with them?
Richard?
I wouldn't mind jumping in on that first and saying, I was going to make a point about that, Anthony, before. It's a really good question. I was like a sort of bolshy teenager going to say they have to step up more, because I think it is a really big question, and I feel like, to be honest, I think it's true of our authors as well. I think our author voices, I know they're busy people, but they are, we are a very important part of what they do, and where I've seen instances where those communities or societies are becoming really vocal about open access and some of the challenges. Frankly, I think that has more impact on government mandates than publishers talking about this. I think it really does. So I guess I'm strongly agreeing with you. I think I don't know what the answer is there. I don't know what the answer is of how we encourage those voices to be amplified. I think a lot of the time something I'm struck with a lot with our authors as well is, even in 2024, how little they know or understand about open access. So I guess as university presses, it's a really interesting question, and again, whether there's something we can do more collectively, because we are all departments of our universities, to try and amplify that kind of that voice. I mean, I heard it most recently with we had an author with the very welcome UKRI announcement that they were going to be funding their own research, and they made funding available. But I think one of the points that was made there was that the university would have to pay, and then they would have to and then apply for the money back from the UKRI. We had a couple of authors who were really nervous because they said that they thought that their universities wouldn't have funds or mechanisms available to even do that. And I think that's probably true, but it shows the extent to which that part of things is not engaged. So I'm blethering on, and I'm not giving you an answer, but I totally agree with you. I think it's
Do you mind if I join that question as well? Yeah. So, I mean, at UCL Press, we are funded by our institution, and a lot of what we're doing with our senior leadership team is demonstrating that value. So helping them to see those dotted lines from the kinds of open access material that we publish, and leading to things like bigger institutional priorities. So some of our big research areas and questions that UCL are, have centres around, or some of our bigger departments and centres, and sort of drawing those dotted lines for them, where we've got publishing around a particular topic or a social issue or a theme, and helping them to sort of map out where that content and material and research and teaching and learning resources maps onto kind of the support that we're providing to students, the kind of interdisciplinary work we're supporting. again, to sort of help them justify, that kind of funding, where we're not just publishing in a vacuum, we are contributing to our institutions' major priorities and the areas that they're looking to kind of prioritise. Also with textbooks, I've heard from a lot of academic departments about how they want to create textbooks that sort of are really sort of showcase all of the teaching that they can provide within their centres, or that they're doing in collaboration with other institutions, and using that as a little bit of an enrolment, using it to encourage enrolment, which again contributes back to our institution and what they want to see happening. So joining up those lines so that we're not just publishing open access stuff in a vacuum, that we are helping them to see how it contributes to the overarching priorities of the institution, and that it's our publishing, but then it can form part of the conversations with the OA team that secure funding for APCs and BPCs with other presses as well. So just kind of giving them as much information that they can then bid for or petition for more funding.
We'll just hand over to Richard and then we'll wrap up.
I think that the struggles that we're having in academic publishing are a prelude to the struggles that academic institutions are going to have and are beginning to have already in justifying their roles in maintaining their budgets and so on. So that might be one way of having relationships with the senior leaders within academia, is that we can show them our battle scars and tell them what worked and didn't. Another is that an important function of universities is to be a provider of knowledge for the community as a whole. And that's something that I don't think we lean into enough. I mean, if we talk to the University of, I don't know, Santiago about why they should do subscribe to open, part of it is the pride of the institution in contributing to making the knowledge available to people in that city and in that country, and that's an important role for them. So I think there are things that we could be talking to them about that might resonate.
Okay, I think there were a couple more questions, but we can talk about them over lunch. So we wrap up now, and there is a walk.
Yeah, if anybody wants to do the walk, it's meeting downstairs in the main lobby in about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And lunch will be served through until 1:45.
Until 1:45, and that's when the next session is back here. Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone.